So our next discussion is on collaborations globally and actions locally. So I'll introduce our moderator and then ask him to make introductions for his panelists. So leading our discussion today is Dr. David Bray. Dr. Bray is both a distinguished fellow and co-chair of the Alfred Loomis Innovation Council at the non-partisan Henry L. Stimson Center. He's also non-resident distinguished fellow with the Business Executives for National Security and a CEO and transformation leader for different under-the-radar tech and data ventures seeking to get started in novel situations. He is principal at LeadDoAdapt Ventures and has served in a variety of leadership roles in turbulent environments, including bioterrorism preparedness and response. Dr. Bray is the executive director for a bipartisan national commission on R&D, providing nonpartisan leadership as a federal agency senior executive, working with the U.S. Navy and Marines on improving organizational adaptability, and U.S. Special Operation Command's J5 Directorate on the challenges of countering disinformation online. He's received both the Joint Civilian Service Commendation Award and the National Intelligence Exceptional Achievement Medal. Dr. Bray, I leave it to you. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, I'm going to stand, and hopefully that works for folks, because I feel like we want to liven this up a little bit. And I am excited to have two distinguished panelists themselves address the topic of both why, what, and how we need to think about when it comes to global collaborations. Obviously, the conversation so far today and in the last few days has been about the fact that we do need to do global collaborations in quantum, but at the same time, let's be candid. It's hard to do those things. There are actually disincentives across nations, there are disincentives across sectors. And so what we're going to do is try to explore and dive into that a little bit as to both what we might be able to do about that, and then how we might actually be able to take some steps forward. So first, I want to introduce a longtime friend and colleague, Alexis Bonnell, who is the Chief Information Officer at AFRL, the Air Force's research lab. In addition to that, she also leads their cyber research directorate activities. She's done a lot also in the past as well as a positive change agent across government as well as in the private sector. With that, I'll go to you, Alexis, with the opening question, which is, you know, you've led change in many different environments, and you've actually brought innovation in some environments that are hard to do. So as you look at what we need to do when it comes to quantum R&D, what might be some things that you want to put out there for us to both consider in terms of the what and the steps forward?
Yeah, so I mean, I think quantum is such an interesting category, and if we step back and think about research in general and all of the advancements that we typically look to make, a lot of times people have this perception that it is, you know, like in the movies, some eureka moment, right? Some brilliant scientist sitting in a dark room, and in my experience, that is just not what happens, right? Innovation and advancement is really about a combination of things, and we've seen this time and time again, and I think that, you know, for us at the Air Force Research Lab, serving both Air Force and Space Force, what's so exciting about that is that, you know, we're really not in the business of manufacturing, right? And what that means is everything we do has to be in collaboration, right? And has to be with the intent that actually academia or private sector will actually take it forward, right? We'll make it something that we can then buy at scale. And so we really don't have, it's not an option, right, for us not to collaborate. And I think what's really interesting is being able to have the unique kind of privilege and thinking about how do we make that easier. And what I'd really anchor, I guess, on is, you know, the opportunity to be curious together. And, you know, by way, David will indulge me because he's kind. You know, one of the things that's been so interesting about thinking about the last couple of years is actually stepping back and understanding the magnitude of change. And what I mean by that, and this is why quantum or AI are so important. The first magnitude of change is that our change horizon, whether you are industry, government, defense, that used to be about 5 to 15 years. It's now 6 months to 1.2 years. And if you think about that, what that might mean at an individual level is that an individual leader may be having to make 6 times the amount of decisions in the same period of time. And that's the minimum, right? Then you compile that and compound that with the fact that the majority of really our functional knowledge in the world becoming data happened in the last 3 to 5 years. And so what that means is not only is someone expected to decisions faster than ever, they're expected to make them more accurately, right, with more information. And in government, we're expected to be evidence-driven leaders. And so, it's no surprise right now when we find ourselves in this moment of our humanity, of our acceleration. I call it kind of an exponential age. But what that really means is that we have to exercise curiosity faster than ever and collaboration faster than ever. Otherwise, we will fail.
Very well said. I appreciate that, Alexis. And I think that sets some interesting questions that we're going to circle back and dive a little bit further into. I do want to go first to another longtime friend and colleague, Dr. Anthony Scriffignano. He has also played many different roles, including the chief data scientist at Dun & Bradstreet. He is now distinguished fellow at the Stimson Center. And I believe you have more than 100 patents. Is that correct? 98.
Only
Okay,
98?
You're almost there. Come on now, just get 2 more in. He was also chief data scientist or officer of the year for 2018. So with that said, Anthony, you've obviously looked at things from a data, an algorithm, and a computational standpoint, including quantum. You've also done it across multiple countries. I believe you also speak 7 different languages, if I can recall. So as you've done it across different countries, how realistic is it to think that we will start to see collaborations in terms of R&D across countries, or are they more change adverse at the moment, given some sensitivities?
So, big question. When you think about these other countries of which you speak, countries don't make decisions. People in countries make decisions, and they make them for different reasons. So in some countries, you make the decisions that are consistent with the dogma that has come down from on high and contains no ambiguity, and you do so for the furtherment of your career and prosperity of your, so forth. In other parts of the world, there's an inviting of dissent, even at the governmental level, and everything is challenged. And the reality is somewhere in between that. Those are kind of 2 ends of the spectrum. So I think what you see, well, I'll say I know what I've seen in my travels speaking to regulators around the world and government officials is there's a lack of knowledge of what this thing is we call quantum. There's a sense that it's happening. There's 14 critical infrastructures right now. This is one of them, right? So you want me to worry about quantum. Yesterday you wanted me to worry about AI. Is generative AI the same thing as AI? And what about that big data thing? Did that go away? And the reality is all of these things are happening simultaneously, and we don't have the luxury of disambiguating and thinking about them one at a time. And to your point, they're all influencing each other. So, I would make the argument that it's hard to credibly argue you can do this in a silo. Certain things you can do in a silo, but big scale, if you want to harness the possibility of quantum, not only for your defense industrial complex, but also for drug discovery and to help understand the impact of disasters and to improve the human condition and understand where the water is going. And those are all very big chaotic problems. And they're all polynomially non-deterministic, and they all require lots of data. Gee, we just said we have all that, right? So what are we doing? Like, we have all of the pieces. It's the Wizard of Oz, right? The lion and the Tin Man and the Scarecrow already had what they needed at the end. They just had to realize it. I think we're like that right now with quantum. Yeah, of course, there's some amazing innovation that still has to occur, but it's going to occur with certainty. So if I'm in the government, I'm going to plan with that certainty that it's going to occur, not wait and see, because if I wait and see, by the time I realize it happened, it's yesterday's news, which means I'm hypergeometrically down that curve, and I'll never catch up.
Excellent, and I'm going to ask you a quick rejoinder, Anthony, and then I'm going to go to Alexis. And the question I'm going to ask you, Anthony, and I'll let Alexis get ready for is, in companies you've worked with, we won't name any specific names, but in companies you work with, how do they decide that balance between collaborating with different folks from different countries, while at the same time obviously wanting to protect the company's IP, make sure that things don't leave the company or get lost? How do they strike that balance? And then for Alexis, the question I'll be asking you is, what are some examples of collaborations that AFRL are doing? But first, Anthony.
So you want the truth, or you want the?
Oh, we want the truth, because we're here at Quantum, we're at the Quantum Ground State.
It usually starts from how do we monetize this, right? You can either respect the shareholders, or the customers, or the employees. But if you try to do all 3 of those things at the same time, you fall over because you only have 2 feet, right? And so it's a classical problem, right? I just talked about 98 patents. know a thing or two about intellectual property, and I'd like to think that it's closely guarded and held. Well, if somebody wants to pay for access to that, how much money do you have, right? So at some level, there is you will collaborate with your frenemies if there's enough money on the table, and if you don't, and that opportunity was there, your shareholders or your employees or your customers will call you to task on that. And you better have a very good reason why you did it, and it better not be an emotional one that, well, I was afraid, or I wanted to, some nebulous thing that you can't quantify. So it does come down to defending the decision you made and deciding on purpose to do what you did, not falling into that decision by accident because either it was too complicated and you took forever to make a decision and now that decision is no longer relevant, or because you were so ingrained in what you were doing today that you couldn't pick your head up long enough to see that there was something else you could do, or that you had so many dollar signs in your eyes that you bled that intellectual capital, marginalized yourself to the point where you're now a commodity or a hyper commodity, and you become irrelevant, and then you die. So other than that, it's a pretty straightforward tactic.
Sounds simple.
Other than the dying
Go ahead,
part.
Alexis.
No, I mean, I think what's really interesting when we look at behaviors on collaboration, I think the first thing is when you get the party invite, show up. Right, and so we've been a part, for example, of the IBM hub around quantum since 2018. And just the exercising that curiosity. You got something to show us? Great, show us. Get in there. Whether that's university partnerships or a lot of the other things. Yesterday we announced, I think, our partnership with IonQ, but you got to show up to the party, right? And then you have to decide, who do you want to invite to your party? And what's really interesting about innovation and invention and about being able to kind of empower that curiosity to advancement, whether that's monetization or other types of advantage, is actually you got to reduce toil, right? People really, really underestimate the level that toil, right? Whether it's a well-intentioned, bureaucracy or other types of things at any organization eats away at the ability to innovate. And we did some really basic things. So one of those things is sometimes it's really hard to talk to each other when you're on different systems and networks, et cetera. And when you're going to have the right conversation, one of the things we did was actually put together a communication system so that we could have that conversation more fluidly with less, problems, with less toil. And guess what? Less toil, people talk more. People do more together. The second was actually, okay, if we want to experiment, then how do we create those spaces? So whether that is, compute cloud environments, supercompute, now kind of in quantum shared kind of innovation spaces, but how do you actually just reduce all the things that make it really hard? And so I think what I'm really proud of at AFRL is actually a recognition that you can't have brilliance without the bandwidth to be brilliant, right? And reducing toil is a huge part of that. The final thing that I'll say about really some of the magic I've seen maybe pre this role, since I'm fairly new into it, but previously when I was the Chief Innovation Officer at USAID, we were all in the business of innovation. And so it was, whether it was the UK, Canada, Australia, us. And what was interesting is we were all often funding the same things, but we had different stages of business intelligence, right? And so I could be looking at something saying, this might be really interesting science, right? Or really interesting invention. What I didn't know is the UK had funded it 6 months before and actually had a lot of insight on whether or not it worked. And it was our lack of collaboration that meant that either I was, quite frankly, under-optimizing a spend on something that didn't work, and my allies knew it didn't work, and I just hadn't bothered to ask. But what was so interesting is when we actually got together, we said, this is a problem for everyone. At the time, we created something called the Global Innovation Exchange, and we just really let people put in what they knew, right? So whether that was, a place like USAID saying, here's all the stuff we funded, we want it to be accessible. The UK, Gates Foundation, but then we also actually let the innovators put their information in. And what was so interesting is that we went from 0 innovations to 16,000 in 3 years. And even more so, I remember sitting on a call, in the middle of COVID and a ventilator crisis, and people wondering how is it that we get more ventilators made with less things taken out of the current supply chain. And I literally just typed in the word ventilators and saw 13 different solutions, 3 in Bangladesh, 2 in India, right? Not necessarily in my backyard, that I could actually reach out and talk to those people. And so I think this question of, reducing toil, taking advantage of timing, but also just answering the invite to the party and being willing to show up is sometimes, the biggest combination.
Can I?
Excellent, and go ahead.
I love that idea that when you're invited to the party, show up. And as an introvert, I hope someday to be able to embrace it. But there's also an opportunity cost sometimes. And so without naming names, because they're all here somewhere in the building, right? You go work with these guys, you're de facto not working with those guys. So the cost of being wrong in a space that's changing this fast is also something to be considered. One of the things that, so we were talking before this panel and you quoted Einstein that you can't, one of my favorite quotes, you can't solve a problem with the same mindset that you had when you created it. The other thing that he said that I find very empowering is things should be made as simple as possible, but no simpler. Yeah. And we have a tendency to, why don't we just, right? Why don't we just do this thing, or why don't we just do that thing? And we have to be careful that by choosing to do that, when you do your dissertation, they make you do a literature review. You have to find out what other people did when they were trying to solve similar problems. You have to look at, we should make new mistakes every day, not just make mistakes every day. These are easy things to say, not so easy to actually do, because you have more than one party invitation. And so that choice to not do something because you're doing something is a really, I sometimes struggle with that. I'm here today, and David and I both know we had a lot of conflicts around today. And so we chose this, so we're here with you, right?
Well,
unless we're a quantum particle, in which case we may actually be in multiple
we may be
states at the same
actually
time.
here and not here, which would be ironic.
So I'm going to real quick put out an idea, and then I'm going to circle to Anthony and Alexis for closing thoughts before we go to Q&A, and we do welcome one or two questions from the audience. But put out the idea that, let's call it the elephant in the room, that a lot of quantum work heretofore has often been classified for various reasons. And that's maybe something that we may not change, but it gets to your question about how do you make sure you're making new mistakes as opposed to replicating things that are out there. And that quote you mentioned from Einstein, the first one about we cannot solve the problems we're facing using the same thinking that got us into it, this is a challenge of nation states. And again, nation states will be there, but maybe what we need to think of when it comes to quantum R&D collaborations is a network of different people in which we actually take the time to vet the people themselves. You can't do it at the university level because universities themselves are very diverse too, but maybe we need something equivalent to what we have. I mean, I'll just give an example of how US and Canada have the Nexus Pass, where you can actually pass more quickly between the two. Do we actually need to have something where those nations can allow individuals to go through some sort of agreed upon standard, and then actually your reputation and your research follows you, and it gives you the ability to collaborate with some trust amongst the individuals who are doing that. Now that said, Anthony, you get a chance to poke the hole in it, and then I'm going to go to Alexis to actually ask about possible demonstration projects in the United States, because as you mentioned, I think we both mentioned, the challenge is policymakers are still trying to get a hold on what quantum is, and until citizens start to see what it is, policymakers may not care as much. But first, Anthony, either poke your hole or take it in a different direction in terms of if we did a network approach across friends and allies for R&D at the individual level, how would that work?
I see what you did there, because I agree with you, and now you're asking me for the counter argument, but I'll do it anyway.
Because the audience wants to hear it.
So there's a couple of holes or at least stones that I could throw at this. One is that quantum is a poorly defined term and means different things. So you think you're collaborating around quantum, and this guy bought a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and this guy bought coq au vin, because it's two different things.
What, you were talking about sensors,
Yeah,
computers?
right.
What? Okay.
Quantum communication. Okay, well, let's break it down, right? Two words there. Neither one is well defined. So we have that challenge that the it is hard to define. The second challenge that you have is you mentioned classification, and there's a reason why, beyond intellectual property, we protect knowledge, and those compartments are there for a reason. And while we don't want to dupe ourselves into wasting research and doing something that's already been done, the use case that we had in mind might be something we can't talk about. And without understanding that use case, you may not understand why the research took this direction and not that direction. So what I have found very often in these, winking and nodding conversations where you can't really talk about what you're talking about, but you're talking about it anyway, is that it gets abstracted to the point where the conclusions don't make sense because you don't know enough of the postulates that were out there because you can't talk about them. The third problem that you get into is that your friends today aren't your friends tomorrow. And so you created this consortium and you shared all of this, and now the geopolitical landscape changed, And I don't even want to go into it, but there's some great examples of that happening right now. Oh my gosh, right? So now you're fighting with yourself. So those would be the three arguments that come to mind immediately. And since you invited me to do that, the counter argument to all of those is, yeah, but what happens if you take that too far? Everybody's in a corner. There's something called a Chinese room problem. It has nothing to do with China. It's just epistemologically called that. Chinese is a metaphor for this thing that's really hard to learn, which, by the way, it isn't. It's very simple grammar, but
so says the man that speaks.
no, it really is. If anybody wants to talk about it later, it's really not. The symbols are different, but the language isn't that hard to learn. But if you use that as a metaphor, right? If you took all the experts on Chinese and put them in a room and locked the door along with all the literature, that would be the best place to go for knowledge about Chinese. Over time, Chinese evolves. And the experts in that room can only learn about that evolution from the imperfect understanding of the people that come to the door. And so after a while, that becomes the worst place to go. So you lock things down too hard and you create this Chinese room problem, the solution to which is open the windows a little bit, open the door a crack, let people go out and take a break and come back, and then you kind of get the best of both worlds.
Excellent. Thank you, Anthony. Over to you, Alexis, on what might be some possible demonstration projects.
Oh, goodness. So I think that there's a number of things that we're already doing, right, that makes sense. That and I mean, I say we, I mean collectively. I don't mean AFRL, right? But I think to the point that you raised, part of what we have to do is step back and say, what is our relationship with knowledge? And be intentional about, and what relationship with knowledge plays to our strong suits, right? Or plays the things that we're actually good at. And one of the ways I like to talk about it with my team is that, I really think that this is a moment where we tend to have historically liked to think about organization, right? How are we going to organize? As if we have that same level of control, right? As if things aren't moving kind of a bit faster and a bit more out. So I actually asked my team, let's think about ourselves as an organism, right? Maybe to your point. How is it that we are able to change, to see change, and to have a really intentional relationship with what our strengths, what our partners' strengths, and what our relationship with knowledge is? So, again, as an example, whether that is with the private sector, our strength, because we're never going to manufacture something, is not going to be in creating a quantum computer, right? But if we're going to be a healthy organism, goodness knows we're going to need them, right? And we're going to have an organism-like relationship, right, with very permeable boundaries in that knowledge set. What we do really probably have some strength in, and including, our partnerships with academia and others and other governments, is probably the algorithmic, right, or computational side. And part of that is because we know some of the problems we want to solve, right? We know some of the relationships with knowledge we want to have at this moment. And I think what I look at from a technology lens is, one of the things that I'm really passionate about is how, and I think echoes your point, a lot of times in government, in defense, in any organization, we're asking what I would call the curiosity level 1 question, right? That question that's right in front of us. I need the answers, I need the dashboard, I need whatever today. What I think we really need to do in that kind of organism mentality is say, if I got those answers, what would question 2 be, right? What would curiosity level 3 be? What would curiosity level 4 be? And what we have now, which we did not have before, thanks to cloud and APIs and AI and quantum, is the ability to move much more rapidly, right, through that curiosity loop. And so, I guess where I anchor myself is it's not a shortage of demonstration projects. I think we're doing that. It's really owning and understanding what is our relationship with knowledge, who needs to be in this organism, right, to make this work, and then checking it often to say, is it going in the direction, right? Do I need to pivot? Is my organism missing something, right, for the health of what it needs to be? And I think what we're not used to is we want a 5-year partnership. We want perfect structure. And what I would really encourage people, to do instead is to say, how can we be as permeable as possible? How can we be as adaptable as possible? Because, and I'll end on this, adaptability is really about optionality at speed. And I think that's the part where, I would love a perfect plan, but I'm not going to bet my reputation on one, right?
Well, and what I love about what you said with the organism example, so believe it or not, 2 decades ago, I was conflicted with the challenge that people thought they could actually manage knowledge. And I said, well, that would actually require you to actually know what knowledge is useful in what context. And if you know what knowledge is useful in what context, then you're probably omniscient and you don't even worry about managing knowledge. It's a meta problem. And so actually what I argued instead is actually need to think about knowledge ecosystems. So that fits to how can we build this ecosystem of partners to play in this space. All right, I'm going to go first.
I'm sorry,
you can get a final rejoinder.
You're not going to Gen AI
AI
your way out of that answer, right? So the answer isn't let AI do that for you.
no, AI cannot
then
solve it.
all of your spark of thought that's never been thought before goes out the window. Sorry.
All right, excellent. I'm going to see, is there a question in the audience? And I will try to repeat it since I know we don't have a microphone to float. Oh, come on. I know there's got to be a burning one. If not, I will ask rejoinders of our panelists, but I want to see if anyone has any burning question.
That incredibly bright light that we can't see.
Go to the light, Anthony. Go to the light.
All right. Well, I'll do the final close and just think about 2 to 3. I hate to say tweet length answers because I know it's a little cliched, but we're going to sort of think about when we move forward. I'll go first to Anthony and then to Alexis. As you look to the future, what would be things you'd want to see happen within the next 1 or 2 years that would give you hope? So 2 to 3 tweet length answers. First Anthony and then close.
In the context of quantum?
Yes.
So the first thing I'd like to see is better definition of terminology so that we can know when we're talking about the same thing.
Right.
The second thing I'd like to see is more clarity around standards and regulatory intent so that we understand where the sidelines are going, because there's a lot of squishiness there. And the third thing I would like to see is that the biggest question, so what is the question we're trying to solve is like one of the most important things you can do in research. Why do we have that question? Why is it so important? Defend that question first. But you also hit on something very important, which is when you set out to answer that question, you have to have controls in place to know that the environment hasn't changed such that the question became irrelevant before you answer it. We fund things and we go off and we do those things, and there's a lot of change happening, and by the time you come back, there's a ship stuck in the middle of the Suez Canal, and you were working on a COVID problem, and now there's an intermodal shipping problem. You got to be able to look at the environment while you're working in it, which is a really difficult thing to do.
Okay, excellent. That was the extended tweet session. So now over to Alexis for your tweet length answers.
So honestly, the thing that I think is the most important is that, very similarly, let's agree on some of the ways we talk about this. Let's also, as much as possible, and I know this is so hard in a space that is so full of incredible minds and experts and math, we have to de-wonk this to bring people along. In working and in actually bringing, like, when did AI has been around for a long time, right? We've been working for a long time. When did it become accessible and popular and the topic and driving stock prices? When my grandma could go on and use it, right? And I don't mean that we're gonna be around the corner from that with quantum, but we have to really want to inspire and engage people who are not wonky and who are not technical and who are not, gonna speak all of the cool language and no qubits and all of those things. And I think, why that matters is because that rarefiedness, that exquisiteness is a barrier to curiosity. It is a barrier to minds. It is a barrier to engagement. And so one of the things I really want to see, and maybe this is my bias as like a former, comms running person and a CIO, is, people will come along when you make it comfortable, when you make it exciting, when you make it relevant to them. And I think my ask, when I look at the entire quantum space, is stop feeling special because of how exquisite and how exclusionary you are, and start thinking about, how do I make this relevant to someone? How do I explain it in a really easy way so that I'm untapping the genius that exists, and quite honestly, how do I get a little bit away from the bias of what good quantum minds look like? The one thing I would say, in my lesson in innovation is none of it matters until people can understand it. Right? It stays in this place. And I don't think any of us want it to stay there. So, for what it's worth, when you're doing quantum, don't just hire the brilliant math minds, have a comms person. Have someone else who is making sense of this and who pushes back and says, I don't get it. Help me understand. I don't get it.
Excellent. Thank you, Alexis. Thank you, Anthony. As I do one final close, I'm going to do the dramatic reveal. What I didn't tell you is that both Alexis and Anthony are also distinguished fellows at the Stimson Center and members of the Loomis Council. And what is the Loomis Council? Well, it's possibly a metaphor for the next decade ahead. So back in the 1920s, Alfred Loomis was an entrepreneur on the stock market, made a whole lot of money, got a weird feeling about the stock market towards the late 1920s, and so he actually cashed out. Everyone thought he was crazy, and the market collapsed about 6 months later. So he looked like he was a savant. But he took that money and set up a thing called Tuxedo Park in upstate New York, where he invited researchers from around the world, including apparently Einstein and others, to actually spend time in residency. When World War II broke out, he actually went down to DC and said, I've heard from my colleagues in England about this thing called radar. I think we could miniaturize it. We could put it on our convoys and actually protect our ships. They said, you're crazy. What do you know? You're an entrepreneur. They sent him packing. What they didn't know was he was the cousin of Henry Stimson, the then Secretary of War. And as a result, when World War II ended, it was Churchill who said there were two individuals that saved millions of lives in Europe. One was obviously FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and two was Alfred Loomis. I raise that because that was the model that came for DARPA, and so maybe we need a new Loomis approach. And by the way, if any of you are wealthy philanthropists that want to actually set one up, when it comes to quantum, because that type of research may be very much what we need to tackle in the future ahead. With that, again, I want to give thanks to Alexis, to Anthony. You didn't know they were actually Loomis Council members in disguise. Thanks to our audience, and thanks to our host. Be bold, be brave, be benevolent.